Perfect. Up to this point, you guys have been working on thumbnails, and then first we talked about thumbnails just in the scope of making the form of the vase fit the coil design. And then yesterday we added another dimension to that, no pun intended, when we talked about line rhythms. And so then I had you go back and add into your existing designs, or maybe refine or adjust some of your existing designs so that each piece had 2 line rhythms in it. And then when we went over the rubric is going to ask you to add 1 more type of line rhythm. So you're going to have at least 3 different line rhythms in each of your thumbnails. And then whichever one you pick, obviously, you're going to make sure that that one has 3 for your grade. We all caught up so far on that? Mm-hmm. Okay. So we're transitioning now from when we did the slab bases before. We were rolling slabs and then cutting them out kind of cookie cutter style and attaching them together that way. So we're going to transition now to a different construction method entirely, and this is coil construction. So coil construction, you're still going to wedge up your clay. You're still going to make sure that it's homogeneous all the way through. Although I got to be honest, with coil construction, you don't have to wedge quite as much as with slabs. It's going to be a little bit more forgiving with coils if you have some irregularities in your clay body, because you'll feel it, because it's coil to me is a little bit more hands-on with just how you manipulate the different parts of clay. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to wedge your clay, and then as far as rolling coils, you're just going to kind of break off a section and you're going to roll it back and forth. And as you do that, right, it's going to get kind of long and worm shaped. Okay, now you're going to notice you're going to have parts that kind of fold over itself where it gets like a seam. Don't worry about that, that'll roll out. You're also going to get, can you kind of see where it's thin here? It's almost like a strip. Do you see that? Okay, if that happens, what you just need to do is push a little bit harder, and as you roll, that'll roll out. Okay, now this one kind of started with a pretty big piece of clay to begin with. Okay, and as I roll, can you kind of see where some areas are a little thicker, some areas are starting to get a little bit thin. There's some irregularities happening here, right? And that's very normal, that's going to happen. So the trick is not to be able to roll without irregularities, but the trick is to be able to control them when they happen. Okay, so what I'm going to do is where I'm seeing it get thin, I'm going to avoid those areas, and then I'm going to concentrate the pressure more on the areas that are thicker. Okay, and then as it gets longer, now you don't have to make like really long coils like I have right now. As it gets longer, you're going to see it's going to roll a little bit more unevenly, so that it's possible that it could break in those thinner areas. If it does, it doesn't really matter. You can reattach them with score and slipping. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. This is probably like a pretty average size coil. This is, if you compare it like to my fingers, it's about finger size. We certainly don't want any coils that are thicker than finger size, and that's a good rule of thumb, pun totally intended, that you don't want clay thicker than your thumb, because then it'll get too, it'll be too hard for it to fully dry. And then when you trap moisture, remember you have explosion issues in the kiln. So even if as you're building, if you're like layering or stacking coils on top of each other, you guys experience this with your tiles also, you want to make sure that if you're going to stack more than one coil thick, that you are carving out or like stabbing, pinholes or something from the back so that it has more opportunity to dry. Make sense so far?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Once you have your coils, okay, there are a couple of different ways that you can actually put them together to build, okay? For example, if I was going to start the bottom of a vase, okay, I have essentially 2 main ways that I can do that. I can either make a spiral. Now, right now, I'm just putting this together. If I was actually going to do this for real, I would want to score and get some slip in there, okay? And try to score on both sides. So like if I scored this all the way down this side, And see how I'm scoring the length of the coil? I'm not doing this, okay? Some people, and if you can't see, that's what that looks like right now. I'm just using my fingernail. If you don't have fingernails, you can use a fettling knife or a comb. Any of that will work. Scoring is scoring as long as it's deep, okay? I'm getting crumbles on it, which is a good sign. So I would score that side and I would score the other side. And that way, as I spiral, right, if I had put some water or some slip in there, then those two scored surfaces would be being joined together. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Don't slack on the scoring with your coils, because even though you have a lot more control with coils over like shaping and sculpting and forming the vase, more so I think than you can with slabs sometimes, the construction and like the strength of the construction is not always as strong as slabs unless you really make a point to score and slip. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you think about it, there's between the two round pieces, there's less contact, there's less surface area that's touching between the coils, and so that's going to make it a little weaker. Okay? So if I was going to make a bottom to a vase, I could start like this. I could make like a cinnamon bun. I didn't score enough on this example, but for sake of the demo, I'm going to forge ahead. Okay? I'm just going to assume that you get that. And then on top of that, I can start, now I would score and slip all this as well, but I can start building up walls using coils, right? Okay, when I'm going to overlap, what I would want to do here is just kind of trim this down a little bit at an angle so that this one's then going to ride right on top of it. Okay, and then as you go around and around and around, you can see how it's starting to build up those walls. If I wanted that to get wider, okay, instead of putting it right on top, I can put it more towards the outside, and that's going to matter where you score and where you attach it. Okay, so that would be kind of a wider shape. If I wanted it to be narrower, I could put it right on top. Okay, so that would create a little bit narrower shape. If after, let's say I came, out this way and then up this way, if I wanted it to be narrower, then I would put these coils towards the inside of whatever's underneath them, and then it will start getting narrower. Does that make sense? So that's kind of where the control comes in. If, I don't know where I was going with that. I showed you this base. Another version, another method that you can use for the base is you can just cut a slab for the base instead and then start building your walls on top of that. If you wanted to do that way, you could do that as well. Okay. After you have the base done, so let's say I have this base and let's say I scored and slipped and I have all these walls and yada yada yada, right? Okay, something you're going to notice on the rubric is that you should have an elevated foot. Remember we talked about that a little bit yesterday. We said you could either attach feet on the bottom or you could have a ring foot. So for a ring foot, what you would do is roll a coil. Okay, it doesn't have to be super thick, although it does have to be firm enough that it's going to support the weight of whatever your piece is. Okay, and then you would make this the size of whatever you need. Mine is kind of tiny because it's a demo. Yours is probably going to be a little bit bigger. And then you would attach, scoring and slipping of course, that extra ring on the bottom. And you can have that be on the outside so that it flares out a little bit, or you can have it be right underneath, or you can even have it be a little bit inset. Okay, it's up to you how you want to do that, how you want it to look from the outside. So let's say I'm going to do this as an inset. Okay, I would score and slip that together. I would score and slip this ring onto this base, and that way when I put this back down, it's only going to sit on the ring, and it's going to create that little bit of elevation. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, now that's like the minimum. If you wanted it to be a little bit taller, you could certainly add more than one coil for your foot. Some people will start with an inset one, and then they'll put another one a little bit wider than that, right? That goes all the way around, obviously. And that's going to start looking like it flares out for the foot. So you can have shape to your foot just like you can have shape to the rest of it. Make sense? Question?
Can you like pinch it if you wanted to like make it more?
To change the shape of it? Mm-hmm. Yep. So they don't, all of your coils don't have to be perfectly even all the way around. If you wanted to have a coil that had, for example, like thinner spots and thicker spots, you could sculpt it as you go. You could like pinch it, or you could roll it more in certain areas. You're right, it is going to get weaker in those areas. So what I would do is if I wanted like a coil that had, you know, tapers like that, I would stack that with another coil that had the same tapers, and I would offset them so that where one was thicker, it compensated with a thinner spot, so that eventually they help strengthen each other out. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Or I would use this as like a design feature on the top or something like that, where it's only one thing and it doesn't have to like support a lot of weight. I don't know that I would necessarily put something like this in the middle of something heavy where it had to support a lot. Does that answer your question? Yes? Okay. Did I not? I could keep going.
No, it's fine. You just didn't get what I asked, but that's okay.
Ask again.
Well, I just meant like on the foot part, like I'm thinking of like just a thin, like smooth, like just flared out, like bottom. Like if you just pinched it all the way around and it was just smooth.
If we pinched this like this?
Yeah.
Yes, you could do that. Something else that you can do, okay, so that's like if you want to build with one coil at a time, you want to, you know, go gradually, okay? Something else that you can do is you can kind of create slabs out of coils, because a lot of you are going to have like way more intricate designs than just regular rhythm all the way up, right? So something else that you can do to give you more support to make those more intricate designs, because we want to make these high school level, right, is make slabs out of coils. So also, I forgot to mention this before, when you roll, leave your fingers open, because it helps smooth out those finger grooves over the course of rolling it. If you do it with your fingers together, you're going to get finger marks. Yeah, it's not going to be as even. So something that you can do, like I said, is make like little sections, okay? So what that might look like is, for example, and of course you would score and slip all of these, right? Obviously, good. So if I scored and slipped all of these, okay, and I would do this on a bat board, not right on the table. Also, probably obvious at this point. Then I can attach vertical pieces. So if I scored and slipped all these together, I would basically be making a slab, but out of coils, right? So then you can take that slab once it's all attached together and you can attach that onto your piece however you want. So you can kind of pre-attach small sections so you can get, you know, intricate patterns if you want something to be, this is pretty geometric, right? And this could be like an alternating rhythm. So if I did horizontals, verticals, whatever. Some of you have some really organic designs though, I know, in your thumbnails. So if you wanted to, right, you could do some more intricate stuff with either circles or, you know, curves or scroll work or whatever. Okay, score and slip things together, obviously. And then once all of that is kind of attached in a section that you think would support itself, this is another really good way to do negative space, so you don't have to just like have negative space hanging out there and having to support a lot of weight. You could get this all attached, and then once it's all there, then put that whole section into the side of your piece. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Neato.
When you are scoring, okay, what I don't want you to do is have like a fettling knife.
No.
I don't want you to put your scores like this. You're going to be very tempted to do that. You're going to take your fettling knife and you're going to want to just bounce it along the top because it feels fun or whatever. This doesn't work for a couple of reasons. First of all, if I have another piece that has the same score marks, okay, they're not really going to fit. They're not going to interlock deep enough into each other to actually join. Okay, that's like numero uno problem, because what happens is when you are scoring, it's like making clay little fingers, right? And they have to get together. And then the clay is going to shrink as it dries and as it gets fired. Well, if you do a good enough job of getting those fingers to lock together, it'll shrink together. And it'll actually strengthen that joint. That can be a really positive thing. But if you don't get it together enough, which is what this would do, okay, then as it shrinks, they're going to pull apart. And then you're going to end up with pieces that fall apart either on the way to the kiln or during the process of firing.
And that's not good.
It is not good. That's correct. And it's really obvious why that happened then, because you can pull the pieces right apart and you can see some little perpendicular score lines. Okay, so just be aware of that. Make sure that you're scoring along the coil and that you're doing it really nice and deep so that you get those crumbles. The other thing is you want to make sure that you're scoring carefully enough that when you put them together, you try not to see any scoring on the outside. So try to focus your scoring right in the middle. Don't go too far close to the edge. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. What questions do you guys have? Kaylee, you okay?
It's Wednesday.
It is Wednesday. Happy Wednesday.
Yeah.
Feels like Thursday because tomorrow is going to feel like Friday.
Tomorrow is technically speaking our Friday.
So do you guys feel good with this? All right, think back to your designs. Is there anything in your design that I didn't show you how to make that you're
Can I show you one of my thumbnails?
Yeah. You can also make other little shapes if you want to make like teardrops or little squares, or I know some of you have been designing with other shapes too. Hold on one second.
So I have two. So for this one,
Yep.
Is that even possible?
Totally. What I would probably do is I would make loops. So I'm going to do this like really tiny scale right now. I would make a bunch of coils that are like the same size. I would loop them together, score and slip this joint right here, and then I would build it up that way. Just like offset it. Yep, I would go bottom up.
I can't do
And then I would offset them as you go up. Now where that's going to be a little bit challenging is like, see how this is drooping over the edge? So you might have to put like a roll of newspaper in there in between just to kind of support those until it firms up. Coils, you're going to find they dry very fast because there's so much surface area, right? So you're really going to have to do a good job keeping wet paper towels in your bag, making sure your bag is sealed up really well. I would even line your piece with wet paper towels before you bag it just to make sure that it doesn't dry too quickly. If it does dry too quickly, what's going to happen? It's going to crack. Once it starts cracking and drying, there's no coming back from that, unfortunately.
Then you gotta restart.
So that's a good question. What was yours?
How do you do the one where it like splits off into two?
Oh, okay. So if you had, let's use this base, okay? Instead of going farther and farther with this, so let's say you had, that far, right? Then at some point, you're gonna make a shape that only goes part way, and then you're gonna make another shape goes the other part. And then from there, okay, this one's a little bit small, so it's awkward. Yours would be bigger, obviously. From there, then, you're gonna have to seal up, right? Like a couple of these extra holes. However you wanna do that. If you wanna make a little piece that's special to fit in there, you can. If you wanna make a little circle like I did. And then from there, you would just build on this one, and then you would build on this one. So they'd be essentially like two separate pieces from there on. And you can still make them wider and narrower and subdivide them again.
Together then.
You could. So let's say I got this far, and then if I wanted to join them back together again, then I just come in with a big coil, and I could join the whole thing and then start building on that big coil after that. So you just got to watch for like where your extra little gaps are, unless that's going to be your negative space, which it could be. You can also, speaking of negative space, some people usually ask like, well, can I just make the vase and then cut out negative space afterwards? Yeah, you can. It's tougher though to make that balance with your design. It kind of ends up looking like you just had it as an afterthought and you just cut out some spaces afterwards. It's tough to make that balance. So it's easier to plan your negative space in advance and make it along the way versus waiting till the end. But either way is possible. Good question.
Two things. How to make a shape with an opening of coils, like it would open here.
So if
and
this
connect to the
was
base.
your opening, okay, I would probably make this in two pieces.
Yep.
So I would make this base vase first with the opening on the top, and then I would make this as a separate piece, but instead of having a base on that top part, I would just start with an open coil
Okay.
as the base, and then I would build that, the asymmetrical part on
Okay.
top of that. You might want to do this one in sections like this where we talked about making a slab first with your coils, and then you could kind of piece your slabs
Alrighty.
together to make that asymmetry. That's a good
Also,
question.
on the next one, the
This one?
Yeah, create the coils and then curve them or whatever. Like point them. Do you just twist them?
For this
Yes.
little detail, you could, yep, you could do a twist like that. You're gonna do, it's gonna break at some point. You could do that. You could also attach, for example, you could have a coil and then like a larger accent piece and then a coil, and just have that be at different parts.
Would you be able to like make the coil, but then connect the coil with overlapping, and with the overlapping stuff, you just twist it out? Do you get what I'm saying?
Nope, ask me again.
Nope.
Okay, so you make the coil into a circle and you connect it, but there's some overlapping stuff. You'd be able to twist that into a point.
Probably.
Okay.
You're gonna find out that you need to have wetter clay for coils than you did with slabs, right? With slabs, it was all floppy and you needed to let it firm up a little bit so that it kind of held its own. With coils, if it even the stuff that I started working with in the beginning here is already starting to firm up more than it was when I started. So if I coil this, you're gonna see more cracking. Yep. Are you seeing some of those little?
Yep.
Okay. So you're gonna have to really watch your moisture content. That's why we don't do coils first. So you get the hang of that with slabs, and then you can kind of go on. You also may need to do a little bit more moisture control in your wedging to add more moisture or to just control that so that you get the consistency that you want. Keep what you're not using bagged up so that it's not just drying out. Does that make sense? All good questions. Anything else?
I was wondering, like, is this even possible? Like, you would have curls, then you would have an opening right here.
So if you wanted to make something like this, where you're gonna have your negative space kind of be all in one piece, what I would do there is, if I was doing that, and you're gonna be making, so instead of having long coils like this, you're probably gonna have shorter ones, and you're just going to, this is extra fat, but you get the idea. You're just gonna curl them in whatever shape, right? So let's say you make a bunch of those, and you're going to attach them to each other. These are real quick and dirty coils, but you get the idea. So you would slip and score a bunch of these together, however you want, okay? And then you'd have sections that were kind of pre-made, and then once those sections were together, you would take the whole section and add it on, okay? So you would have like a section here, a section here, a section here. You'd leave an opening, right, wherever you want your negative space. Then you'd have your other section. And if you needed to, you could, any of you, could use newspaper to kind of sculpt some sort of like support structure, like a mold. And then you could add your coils around it, right? So that that newspaper will help hold up the coils until they're firm enough to support themselves. The cool thing about doing it with newspaper is that you can make it whatever shape you want.
Cool.
And if, you know, small pieces of newspaper get stuck to your coils and you can't get them all out, they will just burn off in the kiln and it's not a huge deal.
Cool.
Not a lot of newspaper, right? But little parts.
I have one more.
You guys have awesome questions today. Yes.
What about this? Like, if I wanted to do all spirals, like, would you do that on a mold? Would that still count as a
I
coil
probably,
base?
yes, that's a good question. So I would do it exactly like this, except obviously your shapes would be different. I would make small sections of them first, or I would make a mold out of newspaper and masking tape, and then I would build on that mold. Yep, but you
So
can
you
do that,
can't-
still counts.
You can't use the hard ones in there?
You can use the plaster molds, but here's my caveat here. If you use the plaster molds, you really can't leave your piece on there very long, because as soon as that clay starts shrinking, the mold is not going to shrink. So it's kind of like if you had a shirt on that was too small for you, you're going to pop like some stitches, right, if you try to move. The clay, as it shrinks, it's got nowhere to go because that mold is prohibiting it from shrinking, and so you're going to get cracking. Once you get cracking, there's no coming back from it. So you can, but it doesn't
Like,
leave
if
you a
you
lot of
just-
time.
If you just wanted, like, to just have the bottom, so you kind of have the shape, and then you go off of that, like, if you took it off and then started building up off of that.
You can, yep. You just can't do it. I wouldn't leave it on there for more than a day.
Or you could just like make a mat of it and then put it on the mold right away and then just take it off right away.
Yep, you can do that too. Once, like let's say you did that. Let's say you had it on the mold, you let it firm up just a little teeny bit, and then you took it off, right? I would not go back on that mold at any point because it's already shrunk. And it would have to literally stretch that clay and risk cracking to put it back on. I think you guys have had the best questions of any class I've ever had for a coil demo. I'm super excited to see your projects now.
Mines weren't as creative, I guess, so thinking about things you really can do with coils.
No, but that's good because you're thinking ahead, which is what we want. Any other questions?
No.
All right, then I'm gonna check in your thumbnails today. And once I check them in, then you're free to get constructing.